I'm Luke Story. For the past 22 years, I've been relentlessly committed to my deepest passion, designing the ultimate lifestyle based on the most powerful principles of spirituality, health, psychology, and personal development. The Life Stylist Podcast is a show dedicated to sharing my discoveries and the experts behind them with you. Dr. Ted, so good to see you again.
So good to see you, Luke.
Dude, we have the best time.
Yes, always. I remember seeing you the first time and giving you my gifts.
Yeah, boy, what a journey that began. Yeah, so Dr. Ted's been on the show twice. We did one in person in LA when the studio was there, and then we did one Zoom, which the Zoom ones for me are usually kind of but yours was awesome. We went into some crazy stuff. So we'll link to those in the show notes and people can go back. I'll put the link for this one at, lukestory.com/Dr. Ted. So we'll make that the show notes for this one. And then people can go back and listen to the other ones. But yeah, man, super great to see you. I want to start by saying last night I had an interesting experience. Dr. Ted formulated something for me kind of off, not for me, but formulated something kind of off label and gave me.
Inspired by you.
Thank you. I feel honored. And he and his team recommended just take half of one and, just see how you feel. And I was like, psh. Took a whole one. And I was like, wow, this is very interesting. So I had an interesting night.
Yes, actually, I'm in a quarter of it right now. So
Really?
Yeah, it's something that's off the books. It's just something that I was experimenting on for the last 3 years, and it's what I call the ET, or the Enlightenment turkey. And as you know, the definition of enlightenment is very simple. It's freedom from the illusion of the self. And it's not that there is no ego or self, but rather it's an illusion, right? An illusion is really defined as it's not what it seems to be. So you are selfing all the time, meaning your egoic role is always coming up. So I wanted something that will decrease the suffering of people, because suffering, as defined by the Buddha and defined in neuroscience, actually, is this clinging and aversion to things. And what does the clinging and aversion is actually the self, right, or the ego. I don't like to use the term ego usually, because it connotes one sense of self-worth. So I refer to it as a self-referential system. So, and as you know, it was accidentally discovered in 1992, and then experimented on later, that the seat of the ego is in the default mode network. So, and then later on, with these large-scale networks in the brain, they identified the flow networks in the brain as at the central executive network. That's one that's outside looking. I used to do minimally invasive neurosurgery, right? So 4 hours seemed like 20 minutes when you do that. That's you're in a flow state. And they also discovered the switching mechanism between these two. So these two are, it's called the salience network, and they're oscillating. So I said, if I can modulate the action of these three networks, will it give me the feeling of enlightenment? And this is just for my own personal edification. So, the large tracks were not really of networks of the brain, weren't really in an encyclopedia form until 2015. So I started looking right away for molecules that I could give to myself. I said, I could do this meditation thing for 1,000 years. So I could just blast myself with this and at least be free from the illusion of the self for about 4 to 6 hours.
Well, that was definitely the case, my friend. Yeah, it's funny. We took it pretty early before we had dinner, and then at dinner time, I was kind of like, I'm definitely feeling different. And then I started yawning, which I do typically when I do plant medicines and things like that. Some people puke, some people have diarrhea. I just yawn profusely. And I started yawning, and I was like, I think I'm going to go to my room. But then it was only like 8:30, and I thought, well, I can't go to sleep at 8:30. What time am I going to wake up? And so I just kind of hung out in my room because I didn't really feel like being around a lot of people. And it was really interesting because I kind of didn't know what to do with myself because my mind was just so quiet.
Yeah.
I didn't want to watch TV. I didn't want to be on my phone. I called the wife. We had a great FaceTime, and all that. But
Yeah, that's one of the things that you notice, right? Is the first thing that you notice is that the background chatter of your brain stops. I love that about it. Sorry, we can't release this on
I
a
know, I know.
consumer version, but your mind stops, and then you're able to see your roles arise. Right now, I am the husband. Now I am the, for me now I'm the doctor. Now I'm the teacher. I'm the interviewee. You
Yeah,
see this arise
yeah,
without being identified with it. Right, you're
yeah.
not identified with the egoic role. You know that you're the actor instead. You're very aware that you're the actor and that you're playing a role.
The
So
key.
that's what I want to come up, in there. But to Luke's credit, this morning, he was able to correctly identify the chemical classes that I used for this, which is,
Well, of course, because
hey,
I'm sitting there. I'm gonna make one adjustment on your mic real quick. I'm sitting there in my room last night, and of course, I can't help but being like, there's something strangely familiar here. And I start kind of analyzing the felt sense of being. And I think, oh, this feels similar to this thing. But then earlier I kind of felt this thing. So I
yeah,
couldn't wait to see you today to just, like, be like,
yeah,
am I close? Am I in the right
yeah,
classes?
you're able to identify correctly the classes. Well, one class actually, the intention was to downregulate the default mode network where the ego is, right? So the is actually the main structures in the brain for that are more or less midline, right? For the geeks out there, the most well-known one is called the posterior cingulate cortex, and there are studies that are being done, for example, in University of Arizona, where they put a highly focused ultrasound on the posterior cingulate cortex, and you experience the enlightenment.
Oh,
Yeah,
wow.
yeah. So that's because it's basically down regulating the action of that. Of course, the uh, the one that's responsible for your flow activity, right? It's if you see this meditation bands, etc., they basically hit the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, this part of your central executive network. So that's more of the that's more of your outward flow. So the one of the molecules that I use, in fact the last one that I chose, uh, what it does is actually it upregulates the your flow state, right? And then there's a dynamic switching between the two, so that requires a separate molecule to actually modulate the oscillation between the two, and it does give you a mildly dissociated feeling, not fully dissociated but mildly dissociated, meaning you could separate. Everything looks like a mildly like a dream state, like a 3D, 4D, or whatever D, and you know that you are, these are just hands, and there's no identity being placed in the body. That this body is not you.
Incredible
Right?
stuff. Well, it's a great way to start this conversation. We sort of started at the end,
Yes, yes.
but I'm experimenting this weekend throughout these interviews with kind of not having a plan because I'm usually very formulaic and I lay everything that I want to talk about out. And then it gets spontaneous and it goes where it goes
Yeah.
naturally. It's not like a rigid thing, but I do have a framework. I thought, you know what? I'm just going to feel into someone's field and maybe have a quick chat and then just go. But I think with you, where the work that you're doing now with prescriptions and the work that you
Hmm.
just described, just kind of not in the public sector, but more for your research and development, I
Yeah.
guess you could say, is brain optimization. I
Yes.
think right now people are really starting to see that the health of the brain and the lifestyle choices that we make
Hmm.
and different nootropics and supplements and things like that that we can take, the possibilities are kind of endless. And this is something people are really becoming more aware of. So maybe we could start kind of, at the base health optimization level and build our way up to the more nuanced fine tuning.
Sure, sure. I would love to do that. Essentially, because there's a lot of confusion right now about nootropics. You hear nootropics, you hear, oh, take this vitamin B6 as a nootropic, and like, yeah, why? And oh, modafinil is a nootropic, and this piracetam is a nootropic, and so on, and you go, what exactly do they mean by this. And so I want to take a look at the old definition of nootropic, and it was basically Cornelio Giorgia in 72 when he synthesized piracetam. He called it a nootropic, and he essentially said, hey, nootropics can really just be divided into two classes, cognitive enhancers and neuroprotectants, and then shoved all of the vitamins, minerals, etc., under neuroprotectants, right? So I said, there's something off with this, and it's because there's no definition of what is health and what is fitness, right? So health is really very simple. It's A plus B plus C. You like the acronym is A is absence of disease, plus B, the balance between anabolic processes, meaning processes that build, and catabolic processes, processes that destroy, according to C, the cycle of life of the organism. So illness medicine just deals with the absence of disease. So I said, I'll take B and C, which is the balancing of the anabolic and catabolic processes according to the cycle of life of the organism, and I call that health optimization. So what does this really mean? It means that just because you're not sick doesn't mean you're well. It only means you're not sick, right? So that has to be differentiated with the definition of fitness, right? And fitness basically asks the question, fit to do what? Like, for example, if you look at the advertisements of these sex pills, right, or these erection pills, make sure that you're fit for sexual activity, not healthy for for sexual activity, right? Or in law, you're fit to stand trial, not healthy to stand trial. So there's a question: fit for what? And so your baseline for fitness is not necessarily healthy. For example, I can be healthy, but I'm not fit to run a marathon, right? And you can be fit to run a marathon, but you may not be healthy. The same way in the brain, I may have a healthy brain, but I'm not fit to be a memory athlete yet because it requires training, right? But you may be a memory athlete, but your brain isn't healthy. So you could see now that performance is actually defined by the term fitness. It's like, would performance to perform what? Are you fit to perform what? Memorizing, thinking, judging, because that's what the brain does in terms of cognition, right? Cognition is simply remembering, thinking, judging, and having insight, right? So those are the things like what. So when you take a definition from the tropic, we're stuck in the performance mode, right? And we basically have forgotten the health optimization mode. So when I do brain health optimization, essentially the first thing you do is to optimize the whole body first, right? So you start with, since the brain is made up of cells, right? So the brain is made up of neural networks, right? Networks of neurons, and then they're made up of the specialized cell called the neuron. And then the neuron is actually made up of a basic cell. That is nucleus, mitochondria, cytoplasm, cell membrane, etc., which is common to all cells in the body, right? The only cells in the body that don't have mitochondria are the red blood cells. But once upon a time, they did have mitochondria, except that we had to form hemoglobin. So it gave out the mitochondria, so we could have the hemoglobin right there. So you could see that the basic, or where it all comes in, is if you take care of the basic cell, then you're basically taking care of the rest first. So, and that's when I introduced the class called health optimization nootropics, right? So these are the vitamins, minerals, and other cofactors that you need. Like, for example, if you can test this by tests called clinical metabolomics. I think you've had this kind of
Yeah.
test already,
Yeah,
right?
with Dr. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so you could see actually what your levels are of the metabolites of your mitochondria, whether or not you have enough, or whether or not you have enough vitamin B, of the B vitamins, right? For example, B6 is necessary for example, the formation of your serotonin, your happy mood and your hormone, right? So if you take care of the basic cell first, because B6 is needed by everything in the body, right? And so is vitamin C and all this. This is not limited to the brain. So then we have to optimize the health of the basic cell first. We have to optimize the health of mitochondria, the health of the cytoplasm, the nucleus, etc. And one of the things that has been bandied about here is like, okay, oxidative stress, like redox, oxidative stress. Really seriously, that's just, when you think of oxidative stress, Luke, it's easier to think of it as rusting. You're using oxygen, and therefore you will rust things, right? As you're using up oxygen. So when the cell membranes, they wrap all of your cells, right? They can rust, so you could see the action of the rust here by the lipid peroxidation of the body. And the only test we had before for age, right, was called a T-bar test, or the lipid peroxidation test, meaning if your cell membranes were aging faster than your chronological age, then you're actually aging a lot faster than your chronological age. So that was the only test. But now we have various different tests now for that. Like, for example, we have tests for epigenetic age, right? So they test the methylation of your body. It's like the way I see it is the way. David Sinclair actually says it is like it's like having plaque on your teeth, and as you get older, you get more and more plaque, and basically with all of these optimization measures that you do, like you balance your nutrients and hormones. If you have hormone deficiencies or nutrient deficiencies, or you have say mercury toxicity that you have to address, right? It's just like taking out the plaque from your teeth, and then you notice that your methylation marker actually gets younger. And so I thought, I was actually surprised, right? I was bragging to you that I just really turned just 60 just a couple of weeks ago, and my epigenetic age is 22 and a half. So
That's so cool.
I know.
That's great.
Yeah, the old test before was the telomere test, right? The
Right.
telomere testing. And
So the telomere test has become antiquated and there's something better now?
this is something better, but
Okay.
it's also based on something more different, right?
Okay.
Something different. By telomere test, I'm old. I'm 32. So and so this one, as you can see, when you do brain health optimization, you're doing optimization of the whole cell. And sometimes when your body is wholly optimized, you don't need all of this performance optimizing nootropics. So these are
Got it.
my classification, right? So if you're addressing your vitamin, mineral, or deficiencies in amino acids. For example, tryptophan comes from phenylalanine, right? Phenylalanine becomes tryptophan. Tryptophan becomes the basis for the formation of your thyroid hormones, right? And dopamine. And then dopamine becomes epinephrine. So you could see the importance of tryptophan. If you're, for example, if you're talking to someone and you see that the phenylalanine levels are low, you would expect that the dopamine levels are also dropping, and you would expect the person to have uh, essentially have problems with focusing, right? So you don't necessarily have to give Adderall right away. You just take a look at these fundamental things. For example, if you're uh, uh, tyrosine, sorry, phenylalanine becomes tyrosine, becomes dopamine. And if you take a look at tryptophan levels, tryptophan is actually the where serotonin is synthesized from, right? So, uh, so if you look at the tryptophan levels and be slow, then you would expect the metabolites of your serotonin also to be low. So you could see this now. There's all of these could be tested. So by simple amino acid therapy, right? By having more protein rich foods and so on, or checking the amino acid profile of your food. There are some drinks and some powders there that actually show you the amino acid profile of what you're taking. You can actually address these things without using any drugs first, right? So, for example, uh, GABA is actually synthesized from glutamine, right? So it's glutamine, then glutamate, then GABA. So you could see that these fundamental amino acids, these are used by your body all over, right? So that's essentially health optimization, not only of the brain but your entire body. So once your health optimized, then you could push the performance. Now here's where I call them performance optimizing
Like you're
nootropics.
because you're not making up for an underlying deficit, right? So
Yes,
you're
yes,
you're correcting the deficit underneath,
yeah,
getting to a
yeah,
baseline of
yes,
standard health,
yes.
having the precursors and the nutrients necessary to just have general well-being. Then when you get to that point, you turn up the heat.
Right. You said actually a very interesting word, which I introduced in a phrase of introducing health optimization medicine and practice, which was this practice is about. It's the standard. So in disease, you have the standard of care for a particular disease, right? But there is no standard of care for health. So what I'm doing here is defining a standard of care for health, not disease.
Wow.
So it's the first time that actually standard of care for health is being put out there, that this is a standard of care for health. Because in medical school, we're taught about pathogenesis or origins of disease, right? We're never taught about salutogenesis or origins of health. So
That's crazy.
yeah, so what's immediately after you learn anatomy and physiology and biochemistry, you're shoved into pathology, which is like, hey, this is what can go wrong. But we're never taught what is healthy and what can go right, right?
Oh
so
my
so
god.
the assumption is very different, right? So one is what's called pathogenesis, right, which is the illness medicine model. We have the salutogenesis model, right? So um and uh, y- you know we use an evolutionary lens for this standard, right? Because it has been found that all cells in the body, and this is important for you to actually realize, is that all cells in the body, once you stress them out, evolutionarily, they only have eight responses, eight fundamental responses, right? And in order to, and the body, the stress will be, the cells will be stressed all the time, right? They will be stressed all the time because you're continuously adapting to your environment, right? Either short term or long term adaptations to environment. So, what's interesting there is that the body actually has what's called a cell danger response, right? So, and the body has mechanisms by which it actually um, uh, hastens the resolution of the cell danger response, right? And that's what we do at health optimization medicine and practice is we optimize the resolution of the cell danger response, because if you do not if the cell danger response is just continuously switched on, that's the beginning of your chronic diseases like your diabetes and all of these other degenerative diseases that come on.
This
So
is also, by the way, sorry to interrupt. My sense or theory on acute or just chronic EMF exposure
mhm,
is a cell danger response.
yeah. Well, that's already
Would
been
would that
shown.
fit in
Yeah, no,
your paradigm?
no. Actually, absolutely, because th- I don't know whether or not you've seen my lecture before, but that EMF has been studied actually in grade school students in Canada, right? And they have shown that EMF actually increases cellular stress. Right, it's not disease, but increases cellular stress.
Right.
So it's actually very funny because when I lectured on that, I showed illness medicine immediately goes, oh, here's the EMF and here's the relation to diabetes, right? No, but we at Health Optimization go, no, here's the EMF stressor, and here's the response to your oxidative stress of the cell. Right. So we go not to the disease, but to what the cell actually normally does. So the cell will actually strive to immediately resolve, right, the cell danger response. Now, if it's perpetually turned on, then it will go to chronic diseases. And as we know, that illness medicine is very good at acute care, acute infections, for example, or acute trauma, but we have a very dismal record at chronic diseases, and that's because we haven't looked at lower. We're still organ based, right? And so now that we are able to peer inside the cell of what's happening in there and how it responds to stress, now we could actually take a look at this thing and bring it to a coherent framework that you know hey, it's about time that you take a look at the origins of health, right? Because the technology now allows us, it's like a car with a dashboard, right? So before we had no dashboard. So either you went to a doctor with a flat tire, or you already had a heart attack or you already had a stroke, right? Um, but now you have like all of these warning lights, right? The warning lights is like your temperature is getting high, or you're low on windshield wiper fluid, or you have this. And that's a result of us also being able to take a look at inside the cell. So you're now low on alpha lipoic acid, and you're now low on magnesium, etc. That wasn't possible before, right? But it's now possible. So now have a what I call a metabolomic dashboard, right? We take a look at these metabolites and say, okay, they need to be balanced out. They need to get replenished, or there's too much. They need to get removed, right? So that's the core of health optimization, and it's not just in the brain, in the body. And when you're as I said, no one takes care of the basic cell, right? So who takes care of your nucleus, your mitochondria, your cytoplasm? Like your illness medicine doctor? No, they won't take care of that, right? So I said, well, let me start a specialty that will take care of your basic cell and its networks for you, and take care of how the cell responds when it's stressed out. As it turns out, there are around 21 metabolic branch points that you have to balance, with this. And when I looked at it, that paper came out after I introduced this framework. And it was actually quite funny because I'm already addressing all of these. Right, so it was actually a great feeling for me to get validated, by someone who was looking at how we actually respond to stress and how we try to resolve the stress right away. So so from there, then you could go now to the neuron itself, right? So the neuron, actually, when you test for it, so in the basic cell, you're testing for the metabolites inside the cell, right? The fundamental metabolites of your mitochondria, and so on. But when you go and take a look at the neuron now inside in the brain, then you have to take a look at neurotransmitters. And your neurotransmitters already. Dopamine is here for your focus and for the reward system circuitry of the brain. um, there is one thing that I'd like to correct, actually, in terms of the impression of people, that the dopamine reward, if it's the first time that you're actually going to get something, right? It's the first time ever that you're going to get something, then it's the dopamine that's a reward, right? But if it's the second time or the third time that you're going to get reward, the mere anticipation of the reward is enough to burst your dopamine. Right?
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, and
Interesting.
that's why gambling is highly addictive. And all this is anticipation of the
Yeah.
reward, and you couple that with the randomness of the payout. For example, in gambling, right? So the more it gets addictive because you don't know when you're gonna get rewarded for it, but you keep on anticipating, right?
That's that kind of like the social media algorithms
Yeah,
too, right?
yeah,
It's
yeah.
with the likes and follows
Yeah,
and comments
yes,
and
yes.
refreshing and refreshing to see if it
Yeah,
got more traction,
yeah, yeah. That's exactly what it is, right? You're
Yeah.
basically playing on that, and
I
then
remember hearing something about the way that they build apps like Instagram and TikTok and stuff to be, very sticky to the
yeah,
user is they actually designed it to be like a slot machine,
yeah,
with like literally with the refresh, it's like
yeah,
pulling
yeah,
the
yeah,
handle on a slot machine
yeah.
and you got three, ding, 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 you didn't quite get it, so you go again, oh, maybe this time, it's crazy.
It's actually quite sad for us too as a society, because it doesn't matter whether or not what you're saying is true, right? What
Hmm.
matters is that you're emotionally engaged, because that's the one that's gonna, it provides the motivation for you to do the like dislike. Like
Right.
you get very angry at something that is not necessarily true, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the whole game is to manipulate your emotion, right? And so you engage because it's the emotion that will get you engaged. Your brain won't. Your intellect won't get you engaged,
And
right?
it's the engagement that
Yeah,
they've monetized,
yeah.
right? Because the more engaged you are, they throw ads at you, and
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
and that's essentially how you game the dopamine system of your brain, right? Is the reward circuit. So
Wow.
yeah,
How does I want to divert a little
yeah,
here? Something just popped in that for some reason, I've not talked to you a lot about, and we've had a lot of in-depth conversations on mic and off. But how does the dopamine system relate to acute addiction? So not something or chemical addiction. So not gambling or social media,
yeah.
but heroin, cocaine, alcohol,
E- yeah, well,
crystal meth, these really
yes,
hard
because
addictions to break.
these things have the capacity. For example, cocaine has the capacity to raise your dopamine levels to 4,000%.
Oh my God.
Yeah, 4,000x. Sorry,
And that
by
so
by
that
4,000x. Yeah.
so that explains the horrible come down from
Yes.
cocaine,
Yes.
right?
Because it
You're on
basically,
top of the world, you're solving all the world's
yeah,
problems,
yeah,
you're the shit,
yeah.
you feel like king of the universe, and then 20 minutes later you're like, I want to kill myself.
Yes, yes,
Oh
and
God.
that's a reason for that. That's the reason why you feel like Superman, right? In all of this, if if a substance raises your dopamine level substantially, you would like to compulsively redose. You know that, while while you're in this, it's like you're still just, for example, a couple of hours in it, and you want another hit because it feels so good, you don't want to come down, right? Then you know that that is basically a dopamine releasing drug, right? And it releases at high doses. Now, for those of you who are doing this, and you know that you want to compulsively redose, what I advise them to do is to actually set your doses in decreasing. You put them already in capsules if you're taking a powder, and set them. This is now basically mitigation of your uh, that for the risk of addiction, right? Risk mitigation for addiction is that, say, prepare 3 capsules of decreasing doses. Say the recommended dose is 200 milligrams, then put in the next dose at, like, 100 milligrams, and then the next dose at 75, and be done with it. Keep the rest of your powder so that you won't basically use your entire 1 kilo bag in like 2 days.
I would advise just avoid cocaine if we're talking about that one, but
There are many cocaine-like substances.
yeah. What are some of the other ones?
The one that's no longer in the market, for example, is 4-MMC, right?
Oh.
Which is a very strong cocaine-like uh, uh, feeling that you get. And it became a party drug, and then is now out. But it's been replaced by other cathinones ever
I see.
since. Yeah,
You
yeah,
know what I discovered recently through a friend of mine is cacao leaf, not cacao, sorry,
cocaine. Yeah,
coca leaf powder. They call it
yeah.
mambe, and you
Mm,
mix it with baking soda and you
mm,
put it in your cheek.
mm,
And as someone who was a former cocaine addict, I was
mm,
a little nervous. And
mm,
then, I did some research on it, and I found that everyone claims that it's very mild and
mm.
non-addictive, and I really like it. It showed me kind of the wisdom of a plant medicine just
Yeah,
left unadulterated, kind of like
yeah.
kratom or kratom, as someone in the Asia would call it. It's like when you mess with them, then you start taking out the other constituents of that
Mm,
plant
mm.
wisdom that balance it. So it's like the coca leaf it's like the good parts of cocaine without the bad. And there's something about, I mean, obviously you're getting much
Well,
less of the molecule, but I don't ever
it,
find like it's potentially addictive at all. In fact, I have some here. We're not in the United States right now, by the way. Uh,
well,
and
well,
I forgot
it,
about it. I packed it in my bag. So I'm not like thinking, where's the coca leaf? Where's the coca
you
leaf?
know, uh, you know how it's traditionally used, right? It's used as a traditional tea in the Andes because
Right,
to cure altitude sickness.
right.
And it used to be when you hike the Andes and you were feeling sick, right, from the altitude, you could just go to someone's house and they would serve you that for free. They know that you can get that from that high altitude. So that was you could see the native uses it. Of course, it's used as an anesthetic for pain, right? Um, it's also a eugeroic. It makes you feel good, right? I have actually coca leaves in olive oil.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
it extracts something different if it's in oil.
Oh, no
Oh
way.
yeah, yeah,
Interesting. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
So
it's a great
it's
plant medicine. I mean, I use it for focus,
yeah,
doing computer
y-
work and
yeah.
sometimes even interviews.
And here you can just actually not take the leaf itself. You can just take part of the
That's
oil.
so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Why is it? I'm just going to geek out on some chemistry here. Why is it with the coca leaf powder that you have to put this alkaline baking soda in it to activate it? Because when I first got it, I just put it in my mouth and I was like, I don't feel anything.
Yeah, yeah.
And then someone told me, no, you got to mix it with baking soda. So I did that, and then it numbs your cheek, and you get this kind of very mild euphoric and
Yeah.
focus kind of attention benefit from it. But what's up with the baking soda or the
Oh,
olive oil?
oh, it adds the geeky part of it is that it adds an OH group to the molecule, which for which it binds very avidly, right? And it sort of like changes the conformation of the molecule such that it becomes active.
Oh, okay.
So, right, it's just like saying, well, scoot over, and then as it scoots over, it gets scrunched into a different shape.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And does the olive oil formula that
The
you're
olive
fond
oil
of?
actually, since it's water soluble, active substances there are water soluble. Then essentially you're extracting it at higher concentration.
Oh,
Yeah.
interesting. I'm gonna do that. Thank you for the tip. Side note.
Side note,
Yeah.
but anyway,
Yeah.
as I said, these are dopamine releasers, and we were talking before the show. Nicotine at high doses can release dopamine also by 40x, right? So these are
Wow,
yeah,
that's a massive
yeah.
increase.
That's why it's hard to quit cigarette smoking, right? For those who are 3 packs a day or so on, it's like it's really hard to
It's hard for me to not chew Lucy gum every hour all day long.
but because the feeling of being alert, focused, etc. That's very addicting,
It's
right?
a great
Yeah,
feeling.
yeah, it's a great feeling.
Yeah, when you feel sharp and laser focused, especially if you have a purpose. I mean, for me, I started out using nicotine as a nootropic to do
Yeah,
focus work and
yeah.
things like that, but I just kind of got used to the feeling. I like the feeling and
Yeah, nicotine actually works on the same receptors as acetylcholine, so it actually boosts your working memory. So you have a lot more of sort of like temporary storage of information while you're working.
really,
Yeah. So
wow.
yeah. So that's why I put nicotine in blue carnitine. It's because
Yeah.
that's the one that's proven to improve your working memory.
In
Right.
the blue cannatine, you've got what, one
Just
milligram?
1 milligram.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. And I'm a sissy when it comes to the dose, right? I can't even do one blue carnitine. It's like I can only do 1/4.
It's
I'm
probably
I'm already okay because I'm health optimized.
yeah.
So just 1/4 is already just boosts my attention, and I
I've on that note, I've actually noticed over the years as I've become just generally more healthy
mhm.
from the lifestyle that I live that I've become much more sensitive to nootropics.
Yes,
You
yeah,
know,
that's
like
what's gonna
like I
happen,
used to
right?
take a huge tablespoon of paracetam before my interviews, and now that would probably give me
Give me
anxiety.
yeah,
It would be
yeah.
like
Too
too
strong.
stimulating. Yeah.
Well, that's because you're getting more and more health optimized, and that's why I said,
Yeah.
optimize
Yeah.
when your basic cell is optimized, your entire body is optimized. You would just need a little of the performance optimizing nootropic to boost performance, right?
Right. Right.
So we were talking about dopamine and addiction,
Yes. Yes.
and then there is also one that uh, is commonly affected by drugs is your serotonin level, right?
Right.
You can test for the serotonin level. It has a metabolite called 5-hydroxytryptamine, right? That's the you could see the 5-hydroxyindole acetic acid is actually the downstream metabolite. And I have said some patients with very high 5-hydroxyindole acetic acid, and when you look at it, it's like, oh, this is high, but you could see that they're actually overusing their serotonin, right? So these clients are clients because they're not sick, right? They're usually depressed, and they're compensating by using up a lot of serotonin. So you could see the rise in the downstream metabolite of serotonin. So
Interesting.
yeah, and serotonin, as I said, it comes from tryptophan, right? You can just do a make sure that your essential amino acid group is actually at levels between 21 and 30 years old, and you should be okay, right? Um, and your serotonin production should be okay. So and the other important one for wakefulness, right? Instead of taking modafinil, make sure that your norepinephrine levels, which is responsible for your wakefulness, right? When you're focusing, you can focus, but you can be sleepy, right? Those are two separate things, and it's your norepinephrine, or for the British noradrenaline. The norepinephrine actually levels is responsible for your wakefulness, and that comes from dopamine itself. It's a if you just one step and you get actually norepinephrine. So
For this type of testing, Ted, how could someone listening that's like, "Wow,
yeah,
I'm depressed, or I have anxiety, or I can't focus, or can't
yeah,
sleep, or don't have,
yeah.
wakefulness," how could an average person go get these tests done? Where are they available? What are they called?
Yeah, these are called clinical metabolomics tests
Okay.
or metabolomics tests. You can go to the nonprofit that I started a couple of years ago. It's homehope.org, and you could ask for a practitioner
Okay. Cool.
to guide you through. And dot
Homehope.org.
org,
Okay,
yeah,
great. We'll put
yeah.
that in the show notes.
Yeah, and we're always confused with functional medicine people. We're not, because they're after the root causes of disease, and we're after the root causes of health. So we have a very different way of looking at things, right?
Right, right.
So for them, if the disease is over, it's over. For me, the goal is your continuous optimization. So the thing never really stops, right? Your goal really never stops, because you want to continue to optimize health. So those three, actually, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine, determine mood, right? So
Yeah.
so you could now test all of those. But the one thing that's actually neat is that you can consider, acetylcholine, which is responsible for memory, right? And dopamine and serotonin and norepinephrine, you can call them neuromodulators, meaning they modulate the activity, the bursting of the uh, electrical signals in the brain. And the two important ones, which are, we just assume that they're there, but it's neglected most of the time, is that the glutamate, for example, is the major excitatory neurotransmitter in the body, right? In the brain. So that's why there's this, monosodium glutamate is what's called an excitotoxin, because it excites the brain way too much. It's kind of like, there's a Wi-Fi and it's crackling, and that's glutamine.
This is why MSG
Y-
laden food tastes so
Yes,
good, and
tastes so
it's keeps you
good.
coming back for
Yeah,
more.
yeah, and the syndrome from it, if you eat from a restaurant that has MSG in its food, is that you get very irritable, right? And that's because it's an excitatory. Um, Glutamine becomes glutamate, and it's an excitatory neurotransmitter, and that's the main one. You can consider the others as like focal. There are regions in the brain that secrete it, but this one is all over the brain.
Oh,
So it's
interesting.
the main on switch of the brain, right?
Is there any risk to taking certain psychedelics or plant medicines and having like a glutamate inflammatory
N-
response
not
as part of
not
kind of the hangover
yeah,
of that?
not on glutamate, but I will
Okay.
I will
I'm
tell
kind
you
of jumping
I
ahead,
will
but
tell you later
okay.
when we discuss neural networks,
Okay.
where this thing can happen. Um, in terms of the other one that's neglected, actually, is the GABA system, the GABAergic system, right? And that's a main off switch of the brain. It also occurs everywhere, and that's the reason why people one of the reasons why people cannot sleep right away or have poor sleep is that they have poor regulatory control of their GABAergic, what they call GABAergic systems in the brain. Now, uh, the reason why your tongue is orange is that I actually created.
Show them on
Uh,
camera. I'm not ill, guys. I swear.
um, is orange is because I created something that I said, what is it that can calm people down in a natural way? So I took a look at what are the bestsellers out there that calm people down, and you see it's Valium, right? Benzos in street
Yeah.
name,
Yeah.
benzodiazepines, and they actually are agonists, or they actually go to the GABA receptor. So and they induce this calm, right? I said, are there any natural molecules that do that? Oh yeah, there are. And so ever me creating something to calm me down, especially before sleep, when your mind is like, you know, going at 100 miles an hour and you already want to rest, can I take something? And so many people are asking me, we want something for anxiety. And I said, okay. So I took a look at a couple of plant molecules, one of which is actually kava. All right.
Yeah.
We extracted the active ingredient from kava, and took a look and saw that that actually modulates the receptor, right? That plus we're also working with a direct GABA agonist, plus of course CBD and CBG, right? Cannabigerol, the one of the minor cannabinoids out there, so it really calms you down. And we sent it out, and people were saying, no, 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 we get people who say, if you manufacture 2,000 pieces of this, I want it all. So
I'm
yeah.
the same way. Every time I go downstairs and see Scott, I'm like, got any more of those calm ones? What are they called? What are the
Trocom,
Trocom? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. So for
Trocom.
those listening,
Mhm.
there's the Troscriptions, the blue
Teen,
canatine
and then
with
there's just blue,
yeah,
which is
and
just
just like a high dose methylene blue,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then
and
Trocom are
Trocom.
the orange ones.
Yeah,
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 yeah, they're
Trocom.
incredible.
Yes,
I gave
Throw calm the fuck down, right?
we yeah, we gave Bailey one last night, and after like 2 minutes, she's like, "Wow, the side of my face is numb." I'm like, "Yeah, that's the kava.
Yeah,
That's
kava.
strong kava."
Yeah, it's very
There's
strong
a
kava.
lot of crappy kava on the market. I
Yeah,
mean, you go to Whole Foods, you can get like kava
yeah,
capsules. They don't
yeah,
do anything. So I'm glad you guys figured it out. There's a couple of other like tinctures. The Kavaplex,
yeah,
is quite strong, and there's another one called Feel Free. These drinks I have that are made with kratom and
yeah.
kava extract, and they're noticeably calming. I mean, there's a
Yes.
state change, but yours is the only one, especially in a troche, that
Yeah.
like happens that fast. So tell us, just I'm going to sidetrack here. We're
Yeah,
just going to
sure.
bob and
Yeah,
weave.
I'm
You
fine.
you were telling me last night you chose to do or your troches rather than
As
like a capsule, a
Yeah,
pill, a
yeah,
liquid,
yeah. As
because
the
when
buckle trochee, yeah.
yeah, when you put it up in your gum, that it's closer to your
It's your
brain or
brain
something.
circulatory system. So the base of the brain is actually right here, just right above your palate, right? So, um, believe me, I've inserted many catheters in there during my days poking around in the brain, but with live patients. But uh, there are two. Trochee can be a lozenge. You put it under your tongue, but this is a buccal trochee is actually between your upper cheek and gum, right? The space between your cheek and gum is called the buccal uh, space, and you insert it up there. Actually, ideal is for it not to dissolve in saliva, right? Because saliva you're going to swallow. So the better the apposition between your mucous membrane and the trochee itself, then it goes directly to the bloodstream that is at the base of your brain, right? So
Got
the
it.
effect is more
And then
immediate.
it doesn't have to pass through your GI tract and get
Yes,
filtered out by
by the
your
liver.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
by the liver. And as we were talking last night, I said I want to keep it as close to the brain as possible.
Yeah.
But if I were making a boner suppository, I'd probably shove it shove it in the
Put
ass,
it in a yeah, yeah, yeah.
or insert it in the urethra. Yeah, there is actually a drug that you insert in the urethra.
Ow,
Yeah,
ow.
yeah,
I would
yeah.
just not have sex if that was the case. Well, you're gonna meet my friend Dr. John Lawrence, who's been on the show a couple times, and he's the one that makes these NAD
Yeah, yeah,
suppositories and melatonin
yeah.
and stuff. And I like that idea of alternative methods of administration
If
because
delivery,
you
yeah.
can bypass the
Yeah.
all of the filters that are going to take out what you're trying to get in your bloodstream.
Yeah, well, we discussed this before, the reason why DMT is not orally active is that the liver will immediately, degrade it, right? That's why you
Ah,
have
okay,
to inhibit the liver. In fact, Banisteriopsis capi, or the vine itself, that is actually the liver inhibitor, right?
right,
Psychotria viridis, the plant, contains the DMT. So, but what is known as ayahuasca is actually the vine and is actually a liver inhibitor. So
right,
yeah,
right,
so that the DMT in Psychotria viridis, the plant, will actually can actually stay in your system for much longer. So
right.
you could see, well, the liver has been very kind to us, right? It detoxifies a lot of things, and so on. But sometimes, you need to inhibit it in order to get the effects that you want for an oral formulation.
Got it,
For an oral formulation,
got it.
methylene blue actually at low doses will inhibit what's called monoamine oxidase A. And when you do that, and that's in the liver, right? And when you do that, your monoamine neurotransmitters will rise. Dopamine, that's a
Oh,
monoamine,
wow.
right?
Okay,
So,
I got a question for you. Um, a couple years ago, I had, let me see, 6 experiences in peyote ceremonies.
Mhm,
And these peyote ceremonies, the way that these shaman held their ceremonies was that you're not allowed to fall asleep, lay down, anything. You got to be sitting up, cognizant, aware of the
mhm,
whole ceremony because there's all of these ancient traditions that are sort of embedded in that experience. To stay awake, I was doing the transcriptions,
mhm,
the blue cannatine.
mhm.
It's got a little caffeine in there and the
Yeah,
methylene blue.
yeah.
And in all 6 of those experiences, I took the same amount of medicine as everyone else, like a
Mhm,
few handfuls of peyote
mhm.
powdered cactus, and
That's
I didn't really feel it. And afterward, I was wondering because I was the only one taking methylene blue. I was
mhm.
wondering if I like blocked it by taking the methylene blue. Is there anything chemistry wise that I was in that troche that would prevented me from having a more full experience
Yeah, well,
with the mescaline?
mescaline, right? Is
Yeah. Hmm.
peyote is mescaline, and mescaline is a 5-HT2A receptor. It binds to the 5-HT2A receptor, much like LSD and so on. But I think it's like to the order of magnitude of a few thousands less. So a low dose of, a dose of mescaline versus LSD will be thousands of orders of magnitude different. So one, it could be that the dose that you took is way too low. Number two is that you probably raised all of your dope because you're taking that. You probably raised your dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine levels such that the rise in serotonin was not perceptible to you.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting. Okay,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, there were positive experiences, and
yeah.
as the hours wore on, there were some revelations and things that were very powerful and worthwhile. But I just remember on those occasions looking around the room, and I'm going like, "What did these guys take?" Because I'm pretty straight. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It is just
yeah.
I'm not having people are
I-
seeing their grandma in the fire and having all these things, and I'm kind of like, "What time is it?" You know?
yeah, yeah. It's because it actually raises all of the other neurotransmitters, so you have a more balanced look.
Got it.
When you put things in imbalance, like for example in DMT, when there's a very or even MDMA, right, when there's very high rise in your serotonin levels, right, you will see all of those responses, right,
Got it. Got
and
it.
therefore you essentially want to avoid that's called the serotonin syndrome, right? By eating when you eat like tyramine-rich foods like cheeses, for example, or even chocolate, right? Chocolate has phenethylamines and so on. So, and while your liver is blocked, so these are the kinds of things that you would get into, but it's more of the serotonin that you're worried about, right? Dopamine you're worried about because it can get you addicted, and the crash actually is quite severe. In serotonin too, the crash can be quite severe if you just, you know, take MDMA like every 2 hours or something. It's just like really bad, right? um, and so these are the kinds of if you take a look at it, you're basically elevating these neurotransmitters and then crashing them, right? But when you have a liver inhibitor, you know, essentially they rise. So what happened to you there in your experience is that they probably all rose, and since I think the classic peyote is Lalophora williamsi or something like that. It's a cactus, right? Um, and it's actually you need a very high dose of it to approximate even, you know, LSD or any of the other classic psychedelics that are in there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
interesting. Well,
yeah,
I learned just based on intuition, if I'm going to participate in an experience like that, to
yeah,
just leave everything else out so that I can really be more finely tuned to
yeah,
that particular experience or that entourage of different alkaloids and things like that,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
I learned kind of maybe I shouldn't interfere with it and just if I get sleepy, oh well,
yeah.
I think it's kind of my controlling nature. It's like I want to manage every little situation like that so that it's perfect, and sometimes it kind of goes haywire. Not that they were negative experiences, but I just thought, that's interesting. Yeah, I might have blocked some of the experience by just taking things to stay awake and focused and such.
Yeah, it's actually a good segue. You know, you're mentioning of peyote to the next part of what you would like to would like to take a look at in the brain when you optimize it, right? So first we optimize the basic cell, and then the neurons, and then after the neurons, the neural network. Of course, the brain is a network of neurons, right? And here's what it gets interesting, right? When you take high doses of mescaline, for example, or of psilocybin. Psilocybin is a pro drug, right? Psilocin is the active drug. It's converted by the liver to psilocin, right? Um, and what it does is that it essentially dampens the activity of your default mode network, right? Your DMN. It dampens activity. So when you look at for example, we look at the map of the networks of the brain. If the conductor is there or the ego is there, it will tell the different parts of the brain, you and you can communicate, but you and you can't, right?
Oh wow.
So um, and I'm putting my foot down, and that is the symphony that we're creating, right? But if you take out the conductor, you could see all of these different parts of the orchestra communicating with each other, and that's why you get much more creative, right? With psilocybin or with LSD, because you're basically dampening or taking out the ego from the equation. And remember, the ego is not a noun. For me, it's a verb, right? Because you're selfing all the time. Yeah, each time that you're moving around, you're meeting people, etc. The self is just continuously. It's a process rather something
Like
static.
some alter identity or something like that.
Yeah, it's a process
Yeah,
that just comes up, right?
that makes sense. I mean, I think so many people in spiritual circles vilify the ego, and I used to see it from that perspective, like I have to get rid of the ego. That's my problem. But I see it more broadly as nature's way of allowing us to differentiate, right? And
Mm.
to assess and judge. And so when you become too ego identified, then you're into judgment of everything and valuation of everything constantly and putting yourself somewhere in the hierarchy of your valuation as I'm better than everyone in the kind of classical sense of a big ego, or in low self-esteem and low self-worth, your ego identified kind of on the flip side of ego, where your valuation and differentiation of yourself compared to others is less than them. And it puts you in this yo-yo of like, where do I fit
Hmm.
in order to find safety and to perceive threats, right? So,
Wow, you have that down in a complex way.
well,
I look at it really in really very simple terms.
but do
Uh,
you see what I mean?
oh,
So it's like,
I do understand what you
it's
mean.
like the
Yeah,
ego is given to us by creation as part of our navigational system to see where we fit and where it's safe and where it's not, right?
there's where I begin, right?
Okay.
There's where I begin because as a scientist, you know, uh, I look at it from an evolutionary point of view, right? The ego is actually a neural network. Basically, it's a network. Um, that is there for your physical protection, right? It makes sure that you get what you need to eat. It makes sure that you're able to reproduce. It makes sure that you maintain all of these things to keep you alive. So for everything physical, the ego is necessary, right? However, we invented language, and now we have the symbolic system around us, right? And my example is, someone cuts you off in the street, and you flip a bird. It's like you get very hot under the collar. You're no longer being chased by a saber-toothed tiger, right?
Right.
But you're still very self-protective at the time. So for things physical, the ego is necessary. But when it comes to symbolic stuff, it's not necessary anymore, right? The thinking that goes up there, they're just like, I have this. I think of thoughts like a lava lamp, right? They're just thoughts. They're not owned by anyone. They just float out there. But the ego will say, "Oh no, those are mine. Those are my thoughts. Those are my ideas. Those are my, right?" And you see that it actually stems from the fact that it has to provide for itself on the physical dimension, right? But when you basically, move that up to the symbolic dimension, then you get into all of the trouble, right? Because then things begin to have meaning and value, right? Um, for example, oh, you didn't get that fucking promotion or at work or something like that. I'm sorry, I've never occupied a paid position where, where I had to get employed. But um, the thing that's there is that, how can I provide for myself, right? And suddenly your values are actually reflected or rooted still on the physical part of the role of the ego, which is to be able to provide you food, right? And to be able to do that, you must maintain your social status. You must maintain this, and the higher your social status, or the more resources you have, then the more assured you are of the that you're going to be alive and safe for a long time. And that's where ayahuasca actually is very useful, because it removes that insecurity of your survival, right? It removes the insecurity of survival, because the ego is always insecure that it's going to survive. And that drives most of us, right? The insecurity to survive drives most of us in our daily lives. Even if, no matter how far removed you are from that fundamental fractal right there, right, of the insecurity of the ego, if you take a look at what you're doing, why am I really doing this? And you go back and you say, oh, you know, I. Because I think I still have to provide for myself, even if I'm already set, right? So these are the kinds of things that you ask yourself, and you see that the much of the stuff that you do actually stems back from the fundamental physical needs from where the ego arose, right? So that's how I look at it.
Yeah.
For me, it's a
Yeah.
lot simpler. Like, that's the insecurity of being alive and
Yeah.
being able to reproduce.
Well,
uh,
speaking of evolutionarily,
yeah.
right? It's living beings that are, I don't want to say lower because it like devalues them, but a caterpillar to a bird to a cow
Mm,
to a lion, right? They're just running on pure instinct,
mm,
and their senses tell them what's safe, what to eat, what not to eat, who to mate with, but they
mm,
don't have the prefrontal cortex
mm,
to then get trapped in the calculations that we get trapped in when we have that same animal body telling us
mm,
what's safe, what's not safe, mating, food, shelter, all those things you're describing. But we then seem to sort of intellectualize those
mm.
fears of survival and getting what we need and what we want. And
Yeah.
that's the trap, right?
Right.
Where we can't get out of that perspective.
You mentioned something important, the prefrontal cortex. Why do you think teenagers make all of these, horrible decisions and so on? Because it's not fully mature until you're 25 years old,
Some
right?
people I'd venture to say maybe 35, but yeah.
Prolonged adolescence.
Well,
Right?
here, no, to that point though, it's kind of funny, but when I was a kid, I did a lot of drugs really early on, and
Uh-huh.
thankfully I was able to stop that when I
Uh-huh.
was 26. I mean, recreational, destructive drugs. And so during the time when my brain was supposed to be developing and coming
Mm,
online like that,
mm,
I got sober when I was 26. And I swear to God, from 26 to 36 is when I started actually kind of growing up,
mm.
because I was so stunted emotionally and mentally, and God knows what other damage. So I wonder how common that is for people that actually shunt the development of their brain when it's supposed to be happening naturally and end up kind of, behind, so to speak.
Yeah, when you at what age did you start using drugs, Luke?
8 or 9.
8 or 9. Well, the brain, the major events in the brain at the time will be as you're hitting puberty, right? The brain remyelinates, meaning the insulation of the wires of the brain get changed. So the first quiescent period is at age 7, right? Because that's when the myelination is complete for that particular time, and then it starts remyelinating again, or reinsulating itself when puberty hits. That's why there are so many cross wires, right? Because of the uninsulated wires, because the hormones will be changing the firing rates and so on and so forth. It's necessary for sexual maturation, right? So that's what's called the organic brain syndrome, right? And people have been wondering whether or not that could be used for as a legal argument for teenagers, doing terrible
Right,
things,
right,
right?
right.
So in your case, like you started at 8 or 9, and then your brain had to remyelinate, right? And then your prefrontal cortex is also maturing, and so when you're actually hijacking the dopaminergic system or the serotonergic system, and cocaine is dopaminergic essentially, you're essentially exhausting already the cells of of the body. But the good thing is, when you're younger, your capacity for neurogenesis is so much higher, right? As adults, there's still some neurogenesis that goes on, or meaning the production of new nerve cells, but not as much when you were younger. So the bounce back that you're getting is actually because you woke up and said, "I'm not gonna do this shit to my brain anymore, or to myself anymore."
Yeah.
But when did you stop using drugs? When you
26.
76?
Yeah.
Well, that's why you're like this, man. It's I'm kidding. Because um, I don't recommend actually constant drug use, right? For until you're
Yeah.
about to 20. No, if you're for me, it's like this. If you're going to get fucking addicted, get addicted at 26. Don't get addicted
Yeah,
before.
I would agree. I would agree.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
it's a tough life to grow out of,
yeah. Because
too.
the
And many
prefront.
people don't. Many people don't escape. I would say the vast majority of people that go into acute cycles of addiction don't end up recovering,
Yeah,
you know.
the prefrontal cortex is very important for risk assessment, right? What risks are you going to take in your life, and how do you intuitively calculate those risks? And that's extremely important, right? So
Hence teenagers,
yeah,
driving 150 miles an
yeah,
hour into a
yeah,
tree.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's funny you say that because I notice now as I'm older and hopefully a little bit wiser, I don't like doing things that are physically dangerous for the thrill of it,
Yeah,
right? When I was young, I mean, my
yeah,
whole life choice,
yeah.
spectrum was based on that. But yeah, like jumping off cliffs and, skydiving, whatever, things like that. It's like, I find myself opting out of things like that where there is risk involved. I guess the
Oh,
ability
oh,
to assess that has been restored or established now.
you keep on pulling stuff out of me when you're saying something. You're now actually know what your risk aversions are, right? And
Right.
uh, I have this model, the video game model of living my life, right? It's like the three things that are important to me are life, health, and time. So one, I'm not going to put my life uh, at risk. You know, yeah, I'm okay to go bungee jumping. I'm okay to go skydiving. Those are calculated risks. But I am not going to overtake a guy in anger with an obvious gun rack at the back of his truck.
Right, right.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
so not put your life necessarily at risk. And so this life, and then this health, right? It's like Pac-Man. You eat all of those cherries and things, even if they taste bad for you. If it's good for you, then you take them, because the quality of your health determines the quality of your life, right? And then what uses it to be, in pain all the time and have all the money in the world, right? And then time is actually, it's the only thing that you have, right? So you have to pay attention as to where you put your attention to in time, right? If you're watching porn, 60% of the day, then that's where you're spending your time. And if you're if you're essentially, if if someone is actually always telling you what to do, then you're actually doing your time under his time, right? So for me, it's like, if you don't do all these things, it will be game over, right? So you do all these things so that you actually don't go game over way too early. Right? So and it's the only currency that we have, really, is a time and our use of it, right?
yeah.
So
I mean, it's maybe, other than the body, the only thing that you can truly own, right? I
yeah,
mean, you can't really metaphysically own anything
yeah.
except how you
It's
choose to
just to
spend
spend
each
your time.
second, right?
Yeah, on a practical level, since we're talking about health optimization here, I have patients. These are actually sick people, not clients who are healthy. I have patients who I tell them to do an 8 hour feeding window, you know, and before I suggest that, I ask them whether or not they could change their diet. And of course, they can't, right? Because the hardest thing to do is to change your diet. So I said, okay, if you cannot control what you eat, can you control the time that you eat it? Oh, that's easy for me. So if you present it that way, it's like, yeah, I can control my time. I can limit my eating in 12 hours. Okay. If you can limit it for 12 hours, then let's start with that. And then you limit it for to 10 hours of eating. And then 8 hours of eating, and then you stay there, and they see the developments in themselves. So that's the value of being able to take a look at where, even in the habits that you have, where in time do you spend them in the day, right? So you could get into nutritional ketosis when you wake up, because you haven't eaten for the 8 hours of your sleep, and then you extend that to, say, to noon, and then you're 16 hours fasted, and then your mitochondria is regenerating fine, and your autophagy systems are doing well. And one of the things that I learned in practice is that it's very hard to tell patients to remember things. So I want everything complete within the day. They know when they're going to eat. They know that when they're going to stop eating during the day. So it's a daily schedule. They know when they stop eating, and they know when they can sleep. Right. So it's like, and that's basically controlling the flow of your time. Right. I'm not telling them to be militaristic and say, you know, as I used to be when I was college, 7:01 to 7:02, wash face, seven. That's the obsessive compulsive way of doing it. But you could see how looking at what you value, which is one of the things that you said earlier, determines how you spend your time. If you wake up in the morning and you meditate, then you're actually valuing your energy self, right? You're valuing your equanimity. You're valuing, it's important to you to start your day in equanimity, for example. um, uh, and then you go out and spend your day in the sun, you hydrate yourself, etc. So it shows you, just looking at where you spend your time shows you what you value in your life, right? So for people who have kids, they spend time with their kids, and so on. And it shows you where they value in their lives. But sometimes you go overboard, right? And I tell people with kids, like, hey, you have to take care of yourself first. It's like the oxygen mask in an airplane. You got to put your oxygen mask on first before you can put it on your child. So it's the same thing with your health. You have to take care of yourself first. Otherwise, no one will be left to actually take care of your kids if you don't take care of yourself.
Yeah, or like
Yeah.
a EMT, you
Yeah.
train to save yourself first.
Yeah.
You know, it seems selfish on its
Yeah,
face, but when you
yeah.
really look
That's
into it, it's
that's why I
really the way it
say,
works.
being healthy requires a little bit of selfishness because you have to be healthy first, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I like this specialty that I started, health optimization, because I have to walk the talk, right? So I have to be healthy myself.
I
Yeah,
can't believe you're 60, dude,
yeah. Well,
honestly. I mean, not only just the way you look, but your energy and vitality is very obviously robust.
well. Thank you. Look, the
Yeah.
thank you. Look, there's a pill for that. I'm kidding.
There are a few.
if you,
Hey,
you
I want to ask you, Ted, because I mean, I don't know. I feel like we could do like 10-hour podcast blocks. Honestly, there's like so much to talk about. But people always ask me when my tongue's blue,
uh,
like, what does methylene blue do? And I just go, you just energy, focus, mitochondria. You know, I kind of just throw things out. But
yeah,
it's such a unique molecule, and it does so many things that it's like I feel like you could study for years and never really get to all of its benefits. And I find it also so interesting because it's a pharmaceutical, and most pharmaceuticals are kind of single faceted. You know,
yeah,
they
yeah.
kind of they're very targeted, they're isolated, they don't do a lot of different things. And they
Right.
also come with side effects.
Yeah.
And methylene blue, with the exception of mega doses of it that might have some side effects, it only seems to have benefits. So, in relation to brain health,
Yeah.
how does methylene blue
Yeah.
work?
Let me. I told you earlier, I reclassified our nootropics, right? First, you're health optimizing
Yeah.
nootropics, right? And then you go to performance optimizing nootropics, where you're not necessarily healthy, but you want to push something. And then there's a class that I call blue tropics, not because my products are blue, but really because the exemplar of the class is methylene blue. So, methylene blue does basic cell health optimization. It's able to donate electrons in the electron transport chain, and therefore you could produce more brain energy. That's why there's a brightening experience when
Is
you
it?
do that.
It seems to have both pro-oxidant and antioxidant potential. Is that true? And if so, is that unique to this, or are there other things that?
It's because it's either it can be in the reduced form. The reduced form is actually colorless,
Ah,
right?
okay, okay.
So, but in order to do that action, it has to be either not reduced, or and then it moves to its reduced form, and then it's just like any other redox reaction. Right? It accepts an electron, it donates an electron, and then it accepts an electron. So essentially, what it does there is it adds electrons to your electron transport chain. Um, it's a brain health. It basically it's a basic cell health optimizer. It's only good not only for the brain but for the rest of the body, because it's not distributed just to the brain but to the rest of your body. So it's also um, neuronal health optimizer. It's because the neuronal health optimizer will be it's at low levels. It will actually serve as an MAOA inhibitor, meaning it will inhibit your liver and raise your dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine.
It's like
Right?
a natural
Yeah,
antidepressant
yeah,
effect.
yeah. Natural antidepressant effect, and then very good. And the when you give it at a higher dose, it will have MAOB inhibition, and it will prevent the degradation of phenethylamines, like those found in your chocolate, and dopamine. So you become more high with higher doses of it. So after that, there's a neural network. It optimizes your neural network. It raises the brain-derived neurotropic factor, BDNF. So we know that, just as a side comment, because we didn't touch on it earlier. So in neural network, it raises the even microdoses of LSD, for example, will raise your BDNF. Right, methylene blue will raise your BDNF. Um, Ketamine will promote spinogenesis, meaning they forms new connections within 6 hours of taking ketamine. Right.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's crazy.
LSD is within 8 hours. You'll form new connections in the brain.
Even
Uh,
in a microdose.
yeah, yeah, and DMT will promote the growth of new neurons in the hippocampus of the brain. So these are
Wow.
all, you could see that methylene blue is also in that same class because it raises the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. DMT is actually known to produce neurogenesis, right? Which is a more difficult feat to do because you're basically inducing the stem cells say, here, grow more neurons. And
Is that true of endogenous dimethyltryptamine? Say you're doing breath work and yogic
yeah,
exercises, and
it,
you're exciting the pineal gland and that whole cascade of
it's
neurotransmitters to end up with natural DMT in your system.
Yeah, my sense is that it's too low,
Mm,
right? You have to provide a higher exogenous source in order to actually push it to a
got it.
neurogenetic pathway. But I'm not sure. I'm just guessing, right?
Okay.
Because the studies have been to produce to give IV DMT, right? Eh,
I've heard about that.
the practice. So that's methylene blue also does all of that this classic psychedelics do. Um, uh, MDMA works by a different pathway. So MDMA actually works by rewiring your brain in a process called neuroplasticity, right?
Oh,
So,
is this why
y-
MDMA therapy seems to be so
oh
effective?
yeah, they came out with the results of the phase 3 clinical trials, and it's on track to becoming a drug. You have to do it concomitant with psychotherapy,
Right.
right? And they have really great results in that. Um, but what it does, MDMA is actually raises three of your neurotransmitters: your serotonin, your dopamine, and your norepinephrine levels, right? But has to be coupled with psychotherapy for PTSD. Right,
Got
so
it.
that's what it's going to be approved for. As I said, it's going to be disease based for these things. Um, Methylene Blue, basic cell health optimizer, neuronal optimizer, neural network optimizer, and then there's a brain health optimizer. So essentially, with if you do low level light therapy or you expose yourself to sunlight, right? Then it activates the mitochondria in the brain, right? And it actually is neuroprotective. It protects the brain from damage, and it's also a brain performance optimizer because it has been shown to actually enhance memory. So aside from the main part that it enhances cognitively is your recall, right? So that's why methylene blue is what I call a blue tropic. It's an exemplar of the class. It does everything, right? From basic
That's
cell
so
all the way
crazy.
to the brain, to all the way to the performance of the brain. So what I did with blue canopy is to create what I call a blue tropic stack. Right. So now you want more motivational engagement, for example. So there's a little bit more nicotine in there and a bigger working memory. So I was envious of actually that limitless pill. Right. That's why I wanted like what can do this for me. So um, you can stack all of this and you can have what's called a blue tropic stack. And that's how I classify nootropics now. So, health optimizing nootropic that's really needed by your body, not just your brain. And then there's a performance optimizing nootropic for your fitness to perform a task, like to memorize something, or to think about something, or to have an insight about something. What is it good for? And then there's the blue tropic stack, which is both a health optimizing nootropic or an HON, right, and a performance optimizing nootropic. Now, what we didn't touch on really is that in the brain, when you're looking at brain health optimization, right, and you're looking at the EEG to test the brain, right? When you meditate, I know you're a meditator. When you meditate, it has been shown, right, that the frontal uh, theta waves and the parietal gamma waves actually oscillate, right? They oscillate, and there's increased power in both. And it is just found in February. There's a paper, February 2021. Um, that showed that it's actually used by the brain for spatial memory, for memory, for in terms of your location in space, so on. But then there's a study like more than a decade before that shows that ketamine actually modulates this theta uh, and a gamma oscillation. So I'm not telling people, to take ketamine instead of meditating, but
That's so
it does the same thing, right?
that's so interesting. There's so many different things that I want to touch on, but we were talking about ketamine,
Mm-hmm.
and when we're talking about ketamine, we're not talking about like going to a rave and partying,
Mm-hmm.
and God bless people that choose that path, but with a more intentional purpose, whether it be therapist assisted ketamine, journeys and things like
Mm-hmm.
that, or even just lower dose meditations and things like that I've used it for.
Mm-hmm.
I find that one to be as equally bizarre as methylene blue, and the fact that it just does so much,
Yeah.
and that it's a pharmaceutical, because
Yeah.
I'm of the mind like
Well,
pharmaceuticals are always like last resort for anything,
uh,
but ketamine seems very safe if done responsibly.
you know why it's safe, right? For me, as a physician, I find it safe because it doesn't depress your respiration when
Ah,
you're in
okay.
it. That's why it's used in battlefield surgeries, right? It doesn't depress your
And
respiration.
for animals, small animals and
Yes, and
kids and
yeah,
things,
yeah.
right?
I had my tonsillectomy done when I was already in third year medical school, and you know that general anesthesia will actually fuck up your memory, right? So I am a doctor. I was becoming a doctor, and I didn't want to have a fucked up memory. And they've shown that GA can actually fuck up your memory for up to 5 years. It's
Oh,
like
wow.
none of that. So I had actually ketamine infusion, right? And you open your mouth, and there's this huge stroke coming into your your mouth, and you could see everything.
Oh
Yeah,
my
but
god.
that's why it's called a twilight anesthetic, right? You're
Right,
just this in twilight. But
right.
the interesting part of it, the new study that they did actually in the K hole, right? It's the ego dissolution that you feel in a K hole, where you just have to yield and say, "Okay, I am out," right? And you're observing, but you're out. Um, so what's happening there, they found out just recently, this year, is that the cerebral cortex actually stops firing for a few minutes, and you're in the K hall. It's just beautiful silence, right? It's just beautiful silence in there before it starts firing again. But then they also found that the oscillating firing between the theta and gamma waves is the one that produces the dissociation.
Oh,
So
interesting.
yeah, yeah, it's
That's so strange, and we were talking about this in 5-MeO DMT last night, but it's so strange, I think, with those 2 compounds in particular, because in the depth of the experience, and I was telling you about, 5-MeO with this, that I've had a few times where I felt like if I didn't exert a small amount of effort to keep breathing, that I would have just left the body. It's like someone's got to breathe me over here because I'm not here anymore, kind
yeah,
of,
yeah.
sense. And you said, no, that actually won't happen. Otherwise,
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it won't.
everyone would be
Yeah,
dying all the time
yeah.
on it, and it would be a really big fiasco.
It
But
won't depress your respiratory center
that's
because
so
it
strange
will kick in,
versus
right?
like an opiate or
Oh,
something,
an
right?
opiate will definitely cause respiratory depression.
Right.
That's why
So
it's very
someone
dangerous,
might
right?
take heroin and hit that twilight experience and dissolution and disassociation, but their heart actually,
Yeah,
or their
slows
breathing
down.
will
Yeah,
stop and
yeah,
thus
yeah.
heart
and
stop.
and and that's the issue with that, right? And that's why I am the safety for example, for ketamine and for these classic psychedelics, the safety for them is really very high, because no one gets addicted to classic psychedelics. If any, you should have a healthy fear of them, as I do,
Oh my
right?
God, I sure do.
Remember, I have a way of making ayahuasca gentle, right? I
Yeah.
have my
And
pharma.
someday, damn
Yeah,
it, I'm going to join
yeah.
you in that.
um and for me, it's like there's this fear that you're even gonna take it, right? But you feel this calling, but there's a healthy fear. So there's really no danger at all that you're going to get addicted to it. And second is that you're not going to get any respiratory depression from it. In fact, my worry more is that in the traditional, I know that people would like to preserve the traditional ways of doing things, right? Right, like for example, the actual ayahuasca, where you have the dieta and you throw up and so on. Is that if this is done in the forest, etc., you can actually choke, right? You can you can have all of these accidents that can happen. So for me, it's like, is there a more gentle way of doing this? Because I found out from my from my genetic testing that I could not metabolize the MAO inhibitor that in Banisteriopsis caapi. So, in fact, if you really want to kill me, Luke, you can just give me a bottle of proton pump inhibitor like Zantac. I will be dead. Yeah, because I could not
Wow.
metabolize the
Wow.
my liver does not have the enzymatic capacity to detoxify it. And with classic Banisteriopsis caapi vine, which is a liver inhibitor, you know, I couldn't That's the reason why I was throwing up so badly the first time I took it. But it was such a, that it's a significant experience, but it's just like, is there any way to make this experience, more acceptable in terms of the body wear and tear? Because so you could bring back something significant from the journey, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I think that's a good point. There's a balance of the traditional wisdom, the ancient wisdoms, right?
Yeah.
The wisdom carriers, the shaman, the facilitators throughout time that have done things in a certain way.
Yeah.
And I know that there's value in that because in the spirit realm, a lot of things can't be explained. So
Mhm.
perhaps there is some purpose to taking the ayahuasca vine with the DMT containing plant and having that whole experience. The purge. Who knows? Maybe demons are being purged out of you through throwing up. I mean, I've
Mhm.
heard some people next to me, and I'm like,
Uh.
that's more than throwing up. That's the exorcist. You know what I mean? So there's something to that. But
I thought purging meant divorce.
yeah, at times it can. But that said, I mean, I think the intention of people that are having these experiences, with the exception of people that are maybe trying to escape or just have a good time or something, which I would not advise you take these types of
Yeah.
substances to do that. It's probably going to be a nightmare if you do, but which I've experienced earlier in life. But I think we're all seeking to have a deeper relationship with consciousness. There's
Mhm.
something within our spiritual will that wants to go back to the mothership, so to speak,
Yeah.
right? It's like we're here in the earth plane and we're in a material world in our body and it's linear, and yet some of us are drawn to what's beyond that, and we
Mhm.
want to have those experiences. And I think what's exciting, but also people might want to be mindful about, is that now this is becoming more acceptable,
Mhm.
culturally. I mean, we wouldn't have even been talking about this on a microphone
Yeah.
10 years ago, medical licenses or someone's reputation, and also the risk of influencing people to be reckless when they do have these experiences. So it's an interesting time because you have the ancient wisdom, but then you have innovation like
Mhm.
what you're describing.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, well, yeah, we can take DMT without having to have that purgatory effect,
Yeah.
yet still come away with things that heal us emotionally and physically and connect us spiritually and to one another. So
Eh,
it's a really interesting time in that way.
Always very eloquent when you say things that way. I'm a little, me, I'm always like the blunt type in terms of that, because I got stumped once when I was asked, so how do you include um, spiritual health in health optimization medicine and practice? Well, I said, um, lack of spirituality is called the DMT deficiency syndrome.
That's good. That's good.
And just give them DMT and let them
That's
begin their
that's
spiritual journey,
funny.
right?
You know what
Because
what what I've called DMT, particularly 5-MeO, is I call it the cure for atheism. It's like I don't know how you could walk away from that and be like, nope, this is all there is.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's just next level. On that note, we
Hmm.
were chatting a little last night about 5-MeO,
Hmm.
and I was telling you how I felt at
Hmm.
times like
Hmm.
I could stop breathing right now. Like,
Hmm.
am I gonna die?
Hmm.
Not in a fearful way, but just out of curiosity,
Hmm.
being still in a body and having a subtle awareness that your consciousness is still inhabiting and animating this body, but you're barely tethered to the body,
Hmm.
if at all, for moments. And then that fear comes in of like, oh boy, I better get back in the body because
Yeah,
I'm not ready to
that's
leave,
that's
right?
the that's the ego restarting.
I have
Right.
work to
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
here. What is actually happening in the brain and maybe
Yeah, sure.
neurochemistry, but also brain waves in a
Yeah.
5-MeO experience.
Um, I have not seen, for example, the brain waves, but there are fMRI studies, the blood oxygen level um, um, studies of the bold studies that are done in fMRI to see where the blood is actually flowing, right? So we
So
know,
someone's taking 5-MeO and going in a
and
tube.
yeah,
Oh
in a
my
tube,
god! I guess you wouldn't really care actually
yeah.
because you're kind of not there
Yeah, not
anyway. But
there.
yeah,
Yeah. And what it does is that it significantly decreases the blood flow to the default mode network, meaning it actually, for lack of a more shocking word, actually kills the circuit, a short period of time, like totally quiet. So no electrical activity and so on. And
wow.
then your uh and then you get out of the no, you feel the fear again because the
Yeah.
ego is coming up again, the
Yes.
circuit is coming up again.
Yes.
y- y-
Absolutely true. And I've observed quite a few people as just a witness in those
yeah.
experiences, and it's really interesting to see that some folks are able to just completely surrender through
hmm
the whole experience. Maybe it's a 20 to 30-minute whole thing and 3, 4, 5 minutes of the depth of the experience. They
hmm
take the hit, lay back, and they just have a smile on their face and they're just totally surrendered. And other people take the same dose and they're like, fuck this, what's happening? And they
yeah.
totally freak out.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting to observe. You can really see the ego,
Yeah.
fighting and
To
grasping for its
survive, yeah,
sense of
it will yeah,
identity,
yeah.
right? And I had an experience last December
hmm
where, because the first time that I had 5-MeO, I was very surrendered into it. And it was extremely intense, but there was
hmm
nothing that arose within me that was fighting and grasping and hanging on.
hmm
The second time I did it, I had a complete ego, I want to say ego death, but an ego reawakening after the depth of the initial experience, during which the witness observer was not even present. It was just pure consciousness, just absolute oneness.
hmm
Then, as the ego started to reemerge
hmm
and have an awareness that something was happening, it then put up this massive wall of resistance and was like, make this stop. I'm out. I stood up. I was like, make it stop. And it was kind of a bad trip within what ended up being a really beautiful
hmm
and enlightening experience. And it took me a couple weeks of integration to ascertain what might have happened. And what it seemed like happened was there was a total dissolution of the self
hmm
in that default mode network. And I was surrendered into that and just breathing and just in pure consciousness. And then as the ego started to become aware of what had just happened, it put up a fight. But what's so funny, and I think it's such a great example of kind of the lack of innate wisdom in the ego structure. It came up and fought, but it didn't realize it was already gone. You see what I mean? Like
hmm
it was mad about what I already just did, not what was about to happen, because I was reemerging and coming back into normalcy,
Well,
right?
that's classic,
So it
right?
kind of came in like
Yeah.
retroactively. And 2 weeks later, I'm like, wait, ego, you came in and put up resistance, but it was too late. You were already out of the picture for
W-
a good 3 minutes, you know?
Well, but that's exactly what it does, right? What do they say in classic meditation teachings? You always basically either dwell in the past or in the future, but never in the present. So
Right.
that's what the ego does, right? So even if it's already past, it's still actually,
Yeah.
hits you for what you did in the past.
Yeah, it
And
was like it was late, you know? I'm like, "You already missed it.
yeah,
We already separated from you and we were in consciousness. You can relax now." But then, the beautiful thing is in subsequent experiences with that medicine, I've built a working relationship, I guess you could say, with that ego
mhm,
identity, with that structure. And so there's more of a unification between it and I, the
mhm,
self with the capital S. So it's like going into the experiences, even when it gets a little wonky, there's this sort of razor's edge I've been able to find where I keep the ego at bay and communicate to it in a sense that it's safe and that
Yeah,
it can
that's
relax,
the key part.
that
Is
it
that
can relax, and
yeah,
then
you
and then
have
both
to
of us can actually have this incredibly
you have
healing
to keep it
experience.
safe, right? You have to make
Yeah.
it basically feel. The word I like to say is you have to make it feel secure,
Right.
right? Because it's
Right.
the insecurity that drives it,
Right.
right? What drives you to, you already have everything in the world and you still want more, more, and more, right? What drives you to, well, you already have everything in the world and say, I want more profit and therefore I'm going to pollute the waters. I'm going to, use child labor. I'm going to traffic humans and so on and so forth. That's the ego, right? Nothing is ever enough for it, right?
It's
It's,
abject insecurity.
yeah, it's just
Yeah.
the full insecurity. And then what happens when I want to be remembered forever, right? That's
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
the insecurity
Yeah.
of being impermanent. Right? Say one of the meditations that you do, right, is on meditate on impermanence of things. Everything is just impermanent and goes into cycles, and but it doesn't like that. Notice that when you were younger, if you found something good, you wanted to make it permanent, right? But you realize that no, it goes in a cycle. You can't make something permanent, just because you find that it's good. So that's what it does, is that it tries to reassure. You know at my age, I have many patients who want to leave a legacy one way or the other, right? And I tell them, well, you have to reassess, exactly, are you wanting to leave a legacy, or are you going to motivate yourself to allow your values to be revealed in the world instead, right? I myself had that kind of in-depth look at what I really wanted to reveal in the world. Is I am concerned about health. Because it's the one thing that makes people suffer less, right? If you're healthy, you suffer less, the people around you suffer less, and therefore you tend to make healthier decisions, even for the planet, right?
Yeah.
So not
Yeah.
only for other people but for other creatures. The thing is, we've become so this is my lamentation, Luke. We've become so human centric, right? Everything is just about humans, that we are not looking at, we are just one species here. We're probably not the most important one, just the most pernicious ones, right? Uh,
That's funny.
and then there's there are all this our environment,
What's the most important? I think it might be phytoplankton or bees. Those might be my top two.
um, you might be right about the phytoplanktons or the phytoplanktons, because they could generate energy from sunlight,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Just as a tangent here, one of the things before that I was thinking is like, I really think that moving for the sake of finding food is a waste of time. Can I put in some chlorophyll in my system, harvest sunlight, and produce energy? You know.
Totally. I mean,
Um,
they say they're breatharians that nailed that with the sun gazing and the breath. You hear about them, but you need to follow them around 24/7 for a couple
to
years
see.
to make sure they're not sneaking their candy bar or some sardines here and there. I remember back in the early days in kind of the vegan raw food
Yeah,
community, there
yeah,
would be these figures that were supposedly breatharians, and I don't disbelieve that. I mean, in the quantum realm, like energy's energy, right? So
yeah.
I think one could develop that ability. I think it would be a very exceptional person that could do that. But
I just received a cartoon actually that reflects that. It's like if Jesus Christ actually multiplied the loaves into 5,000 and fed it to the multitude would say, "Is that gluten free?" you know,
yeah, or the wine,
and
they'd
then
be like, "What's the sulfite level of this wine, sir?"
but anyway, it was just so funny how how we have made it as complex as we have today, right?
Yeah,
In terms of the way we live our lives and so on. That's why I always like to go back to first principles. You know, um, first principles of health. First principles of performance, first principles of how you combine the two, how and based on our many conversations, Luke, especially our off camera conversations, is that how do we include spiritual health optimization, into everyone's lives, right? Um, how do we make sure that they feel not only included, but they have a sense of responsibility to an organic spaceship called Earth. That's only one that's hurtling through space, and it's the only one we've got for now, right? So, when we look at things that way, all our petty problems are really, really petty. They become so insignificant when we take a look at us as a whole, right? Not just humanity, but the world as a whole, right?
Yeah, as one fluid moving
Yeah,
organism, right? The
yeah,
whole thing. I think that's such an error in humankind's perspective, this dominionistic
yeah, yeah, yeah,
relationship with this living being that we call Earth, that we're separate from it, therefore separate from one another, separate
yeah.
from the environment. And one of the most beautiful, I think, experiences and lessons that I ever had was one day actually in a psilocybin journey out in nature. And it sounds trite, it doesn't. When you describe these processes and these experiences in integration, they always sound like kind of flat. But in the
Yeah.
moment, when you have the realization, you're
Yeah.
like, "Oh my God, the key to life." But
Well, it's because there's one thing that actually captures that. Right? These things are experiential,
right,
right? You can translate it to words all you want, but it will always fall flat because it needs to get experienced,
yes.
right?
So the yes, absolutely. And like any powerful spiritual realization, words fall very short
Yeah.
because there's no way to convey or transmit the felt experience. But what the experience was, despite it sounding like obvious or trite perhaps, was such a profound knowing
Hmm.
that, because I was out in nature and I was like,
Hmm.
wow, God, it feels really good to be out in nature. And, the voice
Hmm.
kind of spoke to me and said, "You are nature." And
Yeah.
everything changed in that moment. My whole relationship to the planet, the living beings on it, was just completely altered forever. I felt like I was part of the fabric of the material world
Hmm.
that's kind of held in suspension here by this invisible hand of God, right? It's
Hmm.
like I don't feel from that moment forward that I'm separate from the frog, the creek, the sky, the other people,
Hmm.
right? Even
Hmm.
those people I disagree
Hmm.
with, looking someone in the eyes and having a conversation, and the intellect going like, I disagree with everything you're saying right now,
Hmm.
yet being able to subjugate that and see past that and go, oh, I'm actually looking at myself right now.
Yeah.
I'm looking at myself, and how much compassion can I generate for this
Yeah.
person that I don't like or disagree with, because I'm actually just really
The same.
cultivating compassion for myself because I am them. That
Yeah.
kind of experience, again, is like, it's hard to describe. It sounds like airy fairy and kind of fluffy unicorns and rainbows, but to actually integrate that and cultivate that and have that experience grow
Yeah.
within me has been a huge gift.
I have a very model. We have model making brains, and I like to put in models in my head on, you know, that when I look at it, I visually understand it inside my head. And I was trying to conceptualize this whole thing. And concepts are the worst things when it comes to this, right? Because you can't express them in concepts. But I said, initially I was looking at myself as this character in a holodeck, right? And everything is made up of the same voxel. We're all the same, right? Made up of the same voxel. Everything is moving around. And then I realized, no, I'm actually the holodeck that contains me and everything else in it. So then you begin to see that that's consciousness, right? That's consciousness. Everything that's appearing in there is you, right? Including the way you look at yourself and this body that you have and so on and so forth. It's just all of those are appearing in consciousness. So that switch from being the character in the holodeck to being the holodeck itself, right? And that you're all made up of these fucking voxels, the same thing, the same energy, same
Yeah,
everything else.
yeah.
Then you shift immediately and say, okay, that's
That's great. That's great. That's kind of like, if you think about the center of the universe,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
The center of the universe seems to be generated from whatever point you are in it,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because there is no like center of the universe over there. The center of the universe is dictated by the observer of said universe. Therefore, I am in the center of it, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
wild.
There is also another thing that you mentioned that actually triggered something in me. Remember, I was raised Catholic, right? So
Oh,
you
right,
you
right.
pray you pray to a God, right? And the God is external and so on. And with the Pharmawaska journey that I did, uh, for 2 years, right? Regularly, every 2 months, I was taking my Pharmawaska. Well,
Wow.
dose of my own medicine, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and it was actually interesting that one of the key lessons that emerged there is that no, you're not a supplicant. You, in the first instance, I was this person looking up, asking the heavens for whatever I needed, right? And after the journey, you are the creator looking down and saying, this is what you want to make happen, right? So from supplicant to creator is one of those major switches that the uh, Pharmawaska journey or the DMT journey has done for me is that, you know, we are basically creating things all the time, right? We're co-creating things all the time, and so we're not separate from our environment. Our environment is making us just as we're making our environment, right?
Wow. Yeah,
so
yeah.
so that's why there's no boundary, there's no difference, right? Between us and others and us and our environment. And your the term is like that old uh, concept that we have of dominating
Mhm,
nature.
mhm.
That's a very old one, and it's very hard to take out because our educational system is that way, right? We are separate, and our role is actually to control and dominate nature. That's how I grew up too. And then you realize, like, no, 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 you are, you are nature itself, so you flow with it, right? And then now you begin to understand, the I Ching, and the Tao Te Ching, and all of these other Chinese systems where they always take a look at how energy flows, right? For
Yeah,
example, I Ching
yeah.
as a divinatory system will see, with the rise and fall of cycles. If you take a look at just as the basic philosophy of how that oracle is made, I Ching is basically, you flow like water. The Tao Te Ching is basically, you flow like water. So you see the energy. It's like, no, you are actually part of that whole process. You are, what is it that Rumi said? You are the ocean in you are the drop in the ocean, and the ocean in a drop. Right. That's
Mm.
that's uh that's what Rumi said. So, and those things are really very hard to communicate, right? Because it's an experience. The best that we have are these kinds of sayings, and it's very hard to understand if you haven't had experience.
Yeah, yeah. Wow, dude.
Yeah.
What a great conversation. Thank you.
Oh,
Every
always a pleasure,
Yeah,
Luke.
every time we chat, I just like expanded consciousness, awareness, learning, intellectual understanding, felt energetics that are beautiful. Thank you for being who you are. Thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, Luke, it's always my pleasure.
Yeah.
And for the people who are following you, Luke has been gracious enough to actually try all of my various experiments and things after I've experimented it on myself. But actually grateful that he's giving me all this feedback.
I love it. I love it. No, that was fun this morning actually getting to kind of like, let me see if I can unravel the mystery of this one, just really out of curiosity, not that it matters, but it's just yeah, when it's difficult to not have one experience like with one molecule, and then when you do something else, the mind wants to find a correlation, right? Because it wants to
Yeah,
kind of make sense of it somehow. But yeah,
yeah,
I love your curiosity, and you have the intellectual prowess and the understanding of chemistry and things like this to actually be able to do things safely and effectively, and move us forward. Because what we're, I think, describing here today in terms of expansion, right? It's
hmm,
expansion. It's expanding consciousness and awareness and intelligence and intuition and
yeah,
memory and all of this stuff that kind of is within consciousness, but the brain seems to be needed to do a lot of it, right? So it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
the brain's kind of this transmitter receiver thing that's helping us to interface with consciousness. And there's ways that you can up level that and
yeah.
improve it.
Actually, two things. One is we should consider us as an entire instrument, right? So we don't have this picture of a disembodied brain. So the brain is actually housed within, us, and it's part of us, and so on. And it's necessary, right? Because with essentially, consciousness is what we all we have in order to experience anything, right? It's all we have. Our appearances, in the internal sensors, external sensors, like your eyes and so on, they all appear within the context of consciousness. So without that, you know we basically don't experience anything in life, right? Because it's what's available. And so for me, um, uh, the mission that I have stated is to democratize enlightenment, right? Because what is preventing us from actually becoming that consciousness itself, or becoming the holodeck itself, right? Becoming conscious itself is that the ego actually prevents us from doing that. What if we can assure it that it's already secure, and its survival is assured, etc., etc.? you know is it possible for us to be able to decrease suffering that way, because it's the ego that suffers? And what I say, when I'm actually teaching this, is that if there's a who, then there's an ego. If there's a who that's suffering, then that's the ego. you know um,
Hmm.
and it's the one that is doing the suffering. So how can we decrease the suffering? Because for me, that's the root fractal, right, of everything else that we do. So if you decrease the suffering, then all the other suffering in your life would decrease, right? And for me, and suffering for me is simply defined as that clinging and aversion of the ego, right? And you're not even noticing it, right? That you have the clinging and aversion. What if you can observe that clinging and aversion, right? So so now, as I said, we go back to the beginning now of uh, our talk here, is that enlightenment is a freedom from the illusion of the self. So when you are free from the illusion of the self, that is just a process in there that's happening, there's no true identity, then you are able to become nature itself. You are able to become consciousness itself, right? And watch everything arise. And important thing for meditators out there, even attention is an arising from the consciousness. That's why that's a role, is to focus from one thing to the other. That's why you anchor it on a breath, or you anchor it on a mantra. You anchor it because you have to hook it somewhere in order to keep it behaving, right?
Right,
Right,
right.
because
It's like tying up a dog.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, it's not, that's not the ego that you're tying attention, right?
Mm.
You're tying attention to something for you to be able to see that it's just another arising in consciousness, right? So and that's how I say that, um our company mission, that's smarter not harder, the makers of prescription, is to decrease suffering in ourselves and to decrease suffering in others, knowing that there is no other.
Damn,
Yeah.
son. Mic drop. Boom. It's a great closer.
Yeah.
Who have been three teachers or teachings that have influenced you, Ted, that you might share with us?
Old or new?
Any. What comes to mind? First thing comes to mind.
Oh.
Teachers or teachings? A concept, a principle, a person, a book,
Oh.
a philosophy.
Um. I'm more into disciplines, right? Teachings in various disciplines. So the first one the first one that I think should be taught to everyone is evolutionary biology. Evolution, your evolution and everything else, because there you could see, what I want people to see there, that I've seen, is that how you were constructed, right? And therefore, when you expand at how the mind works, how you're programmed. So there are two, um, there are two things, and I say this to people. There are two things that you have to be mindful of in your programming. One is a bioevolutionary program, right? For example, thirst, right? That's you need to drink, etc. And then there is the sociocultural program where the thirst becomes I thirst for justice, right? So those are our programming, and their programming is put in there by evolution, put in there by our families, our teachers, your attitudes. You examine your attitudes towards money, towards other people, and so on. You could see there are programs in you that are running. There are programmed in there, and that's why you have to study your evolution, right, and see how you're wired. And the important thing in there that I actually emphasize is know your cognitive biases, right? Your confirmation bias, your sunk cost fallacy bias, and all of these cognitive biases out there. They are how the brain work, right? We're not immune to them. We make them all the time. We make the mistakes all the time. But at least when they're there, you're able to recognize what they are. Right. So that's one field that I wish people would actually take a look at more closely. Not just the evolution of the body, but the evolution of the programming of us, right? How we're programmed. Um, and the second thing that I actually would like people to take a look at is ecology, right? Or deep ecology, as Fritjof Capra used to say, deep ecology, meaning our fundamental relationship with the environment and everything else in it, right? If you begin to know that you are just one species in this, you begin to see how insignificant you are and stop taking yourself way too seriously. Right? Way
Absolutely.
too seriously. And the third is statistics, rational thinking. Bayesian thinking, even Bayesian statistics, so because that is more difficult, but I think it should be taught like in high school already because it's a basis for rational thinking. It's thinking with basically making decisions based on your emotion is easy because that's intuitive, that's knee jerk, right? But when you have to make decisions that are data based, which we have now with the expansion of AI, and this is preparing our youth for the world that we're creating, right? You should know statistics. You should know, probability, statistics and probability. You should know the various statistical models that are out there. You should start early. A simple example there is the seatbelt law, right? Um, you know, um, Before we didn't have it, but when we found out that because we have cars and our technology, and that they found out that people that with seatbelts actually reduce their trauma, the intensity of the trauma or deaths by X%. So that's a rational decision, right? And the example that I gave, Massachusetts was one of the last states to adopt it because it wrinkled their clothes, right? But if you take a look at it, I remember these things by funny examples like that, but it can be applied to your life, right? There are certain decisions in your life where you actually have to make the effort because it requires energy to do rational decision making, right? We do it all the time in medicine, right? We are essentially looking at data all the time of what's coming in. But the problem is that I taught statistics for almost 20 years, and even now, when doctors read articles, it is scary for me what kind of conclusions they draw from it by not understanding exactly the models of statistics that they're looking at, right? So we should start this early so we could have essentially a love for how we evolved and knowing how we're programmed as organic robots that are walking around here on earth, the earth that we're in, right? This is the ecology that we are, and then how we make better decisions by exerting a little effort, by taking a look at the data points and how they might be related to one another. That's the more difficult part because it requires more energy. But we need more of that right now because of the issues that we have for climate change, for example, and all of these other things that are happening to us. Those cannot be revealed by intuition. Those are revealed by the data points in our studies. So those are the three things that have influenced me a lot. I know they're general classes of knowledge, but they have served me well in being able to understand myself, right,
Hmm.
and being able to make decisions, immediate decisions on something, on things that need to get decided on, that are based on, using your terminology now, that when you decide, it's based on love, it's based on abundance, it's based on health, it's based on happiness, it's based on bliss, right? So you're able to make those automatically, right? But it does require some study when when you do that, right? Yeah, I'm able to, like, for example, yeah, I'm able to provide for my family, but at what cost, right? At what cost are we doing this, right? These are the things that, when we actually have a decent, when our kids even have a decent understanding, of these fields of knowledge, they grow up being more conscious of that they're not really separate from their environment. um, and one of the things in health, for example, that we always forget is our vitamin D levels, right? We are yoked to the sun, man. You go out every morning and get some sun.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're yoked to the sun, and that's how. And vitamin D gene is what, about 750 million years old. So the receptor of that, 700 about 750 million years old.
Wow.
We did not yet exist. We're only 250 million years old, right, as a species. So you see how all of these are actually, you know, serving to remind us that we are the environment itself, right? We're not separate from it. We're actors
Amen.
in it. Yeah.
Love it, dude. Thank you so much. That's maybe the coolest answer to my closing question ever, by the way. Usually it's like, oh, shout out to Gandhi, Jesus Christ, whatever, an author or something. That's deep stuff, man. Wow. Thank you so much for being able to go to the depths with me today, and thank you for doing the work you do. In closing, just give us your websites where people can find transcriptions,
Yeah.
any of the other stuff you're doing.
If you want to check out blue canatine and just blue, which is all methylene blue, it's at prescriptions.com. That's like prescriptions, but with a TRO, because we use turkeys. And then for the if you're interested in having a framework for biohacking or helping others biohack, or if you're a physician who would like to use, the new omics sciences in your practice, you can train with us. It's a nonprofit, homehope.org. As you know, the prescriptions actually is a major donor that allows homehope.org to be able to do its charitable work, educating physician. There's a program for physicians, which is health optimization medicine. There's a program for healthcare practitioners who are non-physicians called health optimization practice, or hope. That's why it's called homehope.org. Our slogan is let's bring medicine home, right?
Cool, man.
Yeah. And then the of course the our main website, which contains nothing, is but our mission, which is to democratize enlightenment, is snhlife.com. And for those in Asia, there is biobalanceinstitute.com and metametricslab.com.ph, which is essentially in the Philippines.
Cool.
So,
Cool,
yeah.
man. Wow. God damn, you're managing a lot of stuff, my friend. You must be doing something right if your brain's able to do all that.
Well, if I can maintain this genetic age, I must be doing something right.
I barely manage my one website, and that's a lot. So yeah, man. Thanks so much, Ted. Great to see you, dude.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for spending time with us.
Always, always, Luke.